I mean, I was lucky. I had a really good childhood, really great family, and I feel very blessed. I know many people aren't that fortunate, but great parents who loved us, and dad who was just fully dedicated, and he was a police officer, and which is super cool when you're a kid that your dad's profession is a cop. You kind of feel like he's Superman, and I remember him taking us in rides in his police car. For a time he was a motor cop, taking me around the block on his police motorcycle. It felt so cool. And my mom, just a great mom, stayed home with us up till I think we were maybe in junior high, and then she started working. But just a great childhood. My brother and I I have a brother who's just about a year older than I am, and he and I basically grew up like twins. We're best friends and did everything together and played sports together. And my two best friends growing up were Ryan Norman and David Hancock. And nearly every day Ryan was either at my house or I was at David's house. And just in hindsight, you don't realize how lucky you are to have a good childhood and good friends and good parents and a safe neighborhood. And I should say, at the time you don't see it, but now in hindsight you realize how lucky you are, and to have a brother who's like your best friend and constant playmate. And from the time I'm like 0 to 11 or 12, all I remember is just great things with friends and playing sports and being with my brother and great parents. And we kind of were free to roam, especially in the summers. I remember my mom, like, now that I'm a parent, I understand it, but I remember one summer she just handed my brother and I like $5 and said, "I'll pay you $5 if you go outside and don't come back for 6 hours." And we were like, "Okay," and go out and play around. But one specific story that I'll share is, my personality is I've always been kind of fun-loving and good-natured, and I think I've always been a really good-hearted person, sensitive person to other people and their needs, but at the same time a little more wild. I had a major temper growing up, and had a little more of an emotional streak to me that's maybe become a little more subdued as I've gotten older. But so because of that, if it was between my brother and I, if my brother is just such a good kid and great guy still, but if something was wrong, it was usually my fault. One day we went down on one of those summer days where my mom was just kind of like, "Get out of the house." Me, my brother, and our two friends, the Normans, went down to the local Kmart. We're like, I don't know, 11 years old or so, and we played this little game called shopping cart tag, where we knew we couldn't run around the store because we'd get in trouble. So we would get a shopping cart and walk around as though we were shopping. 11-year-old boys shopping on their own. But we would play tag, where 2 were it and 2 were cops and 2 were robbers, and you'd try to pin each other, through different aisleways in the store and stuff. Just dumb summer things that you're doing to pass the time. Well, when we were doing it, I had grabbed a little toy off the shelf that was a toy cop car that you could press it and it would make a siren sound. So I just had that in my shopping cart because when I was the cop and I'm going after my brother, and when I saw him, I'd press the car and like, woo, and would try to walk around nonchalantly until we pinned my brother. Well, we're playing this game, and after I catch my brother, we decide to walk behind the cash registers, the line of registers. They had this little counter where they sold like ices, the drinks, and we had a few bucks, and we were like, well, let's get an icy. And I forgot that I was still holding the car that I had grabbed off the shelf, and I walked past the registers to grab an icy, and right when I walked past, I just felt this big hand on my shoulder. I turn around and look, and it's this security guard. And he says, I've been following you boys around for, a half an hour, and you're under arrest for shoplifting, is what he tells me. And I'm like, in my 11-year-old way, I'm like, I didn't steal anything. And he's like, what's that in your hand? And it was that car. And I tried to explain to him the story, and he wasn't buying it. And my brother, was like, Sir, he was not stealing that. We were just walking. And my friend, here. And he wasn't. So he takes me back to his office, just me. And I remember I wasn't scared. I was mad and being really defiant towards him in his office. And so, what's your phone number? And he calls my mom at home. And all he says is, Mrs. Sweat, I've arrested your son for shoplifting. Can you come down? I need to talk to you, or something like that. But he doesn't say if it's me or my brother. He just says, I've arrested your son. So my mom comes down, and I wasn't there to see this. My brother told it to me. My mom comes down and gets out of the car and is greeted by my friends and my brother. And right when she sees my brother, my mom just goes, I knew it was Tony. I knew it would be Tony. And Mom, he didn't steal anything. Luckily my mom came in and my brothers and pled my case, and I didn't spend a life in the slammer because of it, but that is just a funny story. My mom, I knew it would be Tony. Just one story too about my mom. During my teenage years, I'd say if I had any rough blip in my life, it was from the time I was about 14 till 14 to 15 really. And by rough blip, I didn't do anything terrible or heinous, but I was it's just some rough years, ninth grade, created by Satan, and he rules over that year of certain people's lives. But I had gone to youth conference during the summer at Utah State University. Our ward went up there, and there was lots of wards up there. At the time, they were hosting youth conferences, and I don't even know why, but so there's all these wards from all these other places, and my friend and I, it's really the first time in your life you're interested in girls and have girlfriends, and I met these girls up there, and these girls were I still remember they were from North Ogden, and I lived in West Valley, 45 minutes to an hour away from North Ogden. And we met these girls at youth conference and flirted with them during the whole week and danced at the multi-ward dances when they combined all these stakes together. We left and got each other's phone numbers, and this is back before the days of any social media and texting, So I remember as a 14-year-old boy, we called them one day during the summer, my friend and I, and these girls were like, well, why don't you come up to North Ogden or Farmington and we'll go to Lagoon, the amusement park. And my friend and I had nothing better to do, and so we were like, okay. And we said, we'll take the bus up there. So we sit down, and at that time, there's no internet either. We're figuring out bus routes, how to get up to Lagoon. And my mom had just gone back to work full time, so she wasn't home now. And I remember, I think I had enough sense, to call her. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. But somehow, we left without asking permission to go up to Lagoon on the bus to meet girls, me and my best friend, two 14-year-old boys taking public transportation all the way up there. And I get on this, I either left my mom a message at her work, or maybe I told my brother, and when my mom called, he told my mom. At some rate, my mom learned it in the middle of the day, and we had taken the bus up into downtown Salt Lake, and we had to do a bus transfer to get on another bus to go north. And I remember we're in the middle of downtown Salt, two 14-year-old boys, and waiting for this bus, and all of a sudden I hear this woman screaming across the street, yelling, "Don't get on that bus! You're not getting on that bus! Tony!" And I look, and there's my mom running in her skirt. I still remember it's the early 90s, late 80s, her earrings dangling down, running across the street. "Don't get on the bus, Tony!" And I'm like, oh my heck, it's my mom. And my mom came and picked my friend and I up, and in no uncertain terms let us know we were not going up to Lagoon to meet some girls. Put us in the car and drove us back home. You know, as a kid, all you are is bummed that you don't get to meet these girls. But now that I'm an adult and a parent and have teenagers of my own, I see it through real different lenses, and I see what a great mom I had too. I can just picture her saying to her boss, "I need to leave right now to go pick up my teenage son who's on public transportation to go meet some girls up in Ogden," and luckily she rescued us. So I don't know. I'd have just a ton of stories like that, just for great parents that really helped me see how great my parents really are and were for me growing up. When I graduated from high school, that summer I needed to get a job, and couldn't find a decent job. I applied everywhere, and it's hard to, if you're younger today, you don't understand it. Back then, you couldn't search for jobs online. There were no databases. You literally would get the newspaper and look in the want ads. And I remember feeling this pressure that I had to earn money. I've just graduated from high school and I need to earn money so I can go to college or go on a mission. My parents were helping me, but they expected me to earn money and work full time that summer. And I couldn't find a job. I remember looking in all these want ads in the paper, and all of them were, they needed certain qualifications that I just did not have. And I even went and interviewed them and tried to fake for a few of them and just never got hired. And finally, this guy in my ward, my neighborhood, was nice and heard I was looking for a job, and he was a general contractor and said, I'll hire him for the summer to basically do grunt construction for him, to be the gopher, like, hey, Tony, see that pile of rocks? I need you to move them. And then I'd move them, and I'd be like, okay, now move them back, that kind of work. He built houses, and I didn't know how to build houses. I didn't have any construction skills. I showed up on the first day of work, and it was just brutal. I have never felt like 8 hours went so slow in my entire life, The guys I were working with were just rough dudes, rough dudes. Some of them wouldn't show up because they were so hungover from the day before. One of the guys would sit there and tell me stories during the day about all the people he had killed. He was a war veteran, but he was just on my first day of work, where I'm up on this scaffolding 20 feet high, helping to hold, we were doing, it's called soffit and fascia on the overhangs of roofs and houses. And I'm 20 feet up on this little scaffolding on my first day of work with this guy who the whole time is telling me stories about people he's killed during wars and swearing up a storm and just rough and rude. And, I'm this fresh out of high school kid who's trying to get ready to go on a mission. And I'm holding this soffit, and he grabs my hat, just pulls my hat off my head and has a nail gun and just goes, and just nails it up to the soffit and just looks at me and goes, like he's the devil incarnate, I get down off the scaffolding to go get some more supplies, and all of a sudden I just hear, and I'm getting shot at. And I look up, and he's holding the nail gun up 20 feet up, shooting nails at me. And anyway, that was my first day of work, And that one, I did that the whole summer. And the benefit to it was I learned some rough carpentry and construction skills that have blessed me the rest of my life as a husband and a father, and building our own basement and stuff like that. But the reason I'm sharing the story was because it was the first experience in my life of, you need skills, you need qualifications, you need an education. Those things really will help your life. And nothing served as a better motivator for me to get my education, to try to learn and gain certain skills, than that work environment. And also the frustration of not being able to get any other jobs because I was frankly totally unqualified, and even with my own children today, I say to them when we're talking about stuff, I'm like, just remember, the more you become skilled in something or educated in something or qualified in something, the more valuable you become and the more people will be willing to pay you. And the less qualified you are, the less specialized, the more that anybody could just do what you're doing, like move this pile of rocks or hold this, the worse your work environment will be, the worse your job will be. And that was a great teenage learning lesson for me that shaped me both as a student and in a career, but also as a dad and trying to help teach my kids. My mission was really life-changing for me. When I left, I went because I knew I should. Frankly, I didn't go because I was really prepared, but I knew I should serve a mission, and I knew it was the right thing to do, and I was called to serve in Bolivia, which when I opened my mission call, I didn't even know where that was at. And I thought it meant Bosnia. I thought I was going to Europe, an Eastern Bloc country, and Bolivia is in the middle of South America and one of the poorest countries there. And the first city I served in was one of the poorest cities in Bolivia. And I joke around that the first man I met was the poorest man in the poorest city and who had the poorest dog. It was more poverty than I'd ever imagined in my life. And it was super hard, where I joke around that I cried myself to sleep in the fetal position for the first few months of my mission, and that's only a slight exaggeration. It was hard. I remembered hearing and reflecting back on all these stories of people talking about their missions and the classic Mormon phrase that it was the best 2 years, and I'm like, these have been the worst 2 months of my life. I can't possibly see how this could be the best 2 years. And but it was one of those, again, a defining moment for me of, am I going to stick to something that's hard and fight through it, or give up and go home? I'm not saying anybody who struggles with anxiety or a serious illness or anything like that, but for me it was just a matter of, this is hard and I'm lonely, and I'd rather be home, But I knew it was where I should be, and I knew it was what I should do. So I stuck it out, and I'm glad I did, because it sure changed me as a person. And I remember the first city I served in was called Potosi. It's 14,000 feet of elevation. It's one of the highest cities in the world. And to put it in perspective, the mountain peaks here along the Wasatch Front, these peaks are 11,000 feet. This city I was living in was at 14,000 feet. And, I had a native companion, lived in a little dumpy little house, and wasn't even I don't even know what it was. Our shower was this little, you had these live electrical wires. You had a tube of water that came out into a coil almost off of a stove, and then these live wires that went to like this Frankenstein type switch. So when you wanted to take a hot shower, you turn the water on, and then and you'd turn this electricity on, and the electricity would electrocute the water, and then you got in there, which I've always been taught you don't mix water and electricity, but they do every day in Bolivia. And I'd only been on my mission a few days and there in Bolivia, and I was confused and disoriented and altitude sickness and couldn't understand my companion or anybody else, and the food was weird and stomach. And I got in the shower and I was trying to wash my hair, and I'm 6'3". The average Bolivian man's about 5'4". The average Bolivian woman's 4'11", 5 feet or so. So I was huge there. And I get in the shower and start washing my hair, and I kind of, with my eyes closed, lost track vertically of where I was at and ended up putting my hands right up into the electrical thing and just electrocuted me. In Bolivia, everybody has these stories of, my uncle's cousin died in the shower, and it totally electrocuted me, and I jumped out of the shower buck naked, and my companion heard this scream and runs around the corner, and I couldn't even say in Spanish what had happened, I was just screaming, and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, I just finally said in English, "The stupid shower electrocuted me." And I just started screaming, he kind of looked at me, watching me having this mental breakdown, right there in front of him, just so angry. I had all these just early stories just like that. But I remember praying at some point during those months, kind of like, and I missed home, and I had this girlfriend at home, and I just wanted to go home, and I wasn't loving the work, and was frankly suffering and lacked a lot of faith, hope, and charity, and just praying, and again, feeling like it was one of those times in my life where God was like, life's not meant to be easy, and the things I'm going to ask you to do aren't meant to be easy, and you're going to struggle, and that's part of life and part of learning, and you need to be here, and you need to stay here. And but I did feel him strengthen me and comfort me, and that he empathized with me and was with me, and that's been, again, another great life lesson for me, that I'm glad I didn't just say, "This is hard, I'm coming home," because the rest of my mission just changed my life, I'm not sure if have ever told anybody this story. It just came to me this morning as I was thinking, but when I got on my mission president really quickly chose me to be in leadership. I went straight from being trained to being a zone leader. Now, I'm not saying anything about, just because you're in leadership, it doesn't mean anything special or that you're some great missionary. Let's not buy into the falsehood that, when someone says I'm the AP, that means you're the best missionary in the mission. But he made me a zone leader really quick, and he told me, I was only 5 months into my mission, and in an interview he said, "Oh yeah, I've already kind of pegged you. I want you to be one of my assistants in the office." And about 11 months into my mission, a year into my mission, he called me to be one of his assistants, which means you and your companion are two of the ones with the president and his counselors that helps run a lot of the major aspects of the mission. And I remember one day I was going through the files. We were getting some new missionaries who were getting ready to arrive, and we got their files, and we had this filing cabinet with every missionary and their files from downtown Salt Lake. And I went to file away these mission files, and I thought, I wonder what my mission file says. And I saw mine, Elder Anthony Sweat, and I pulled it out, and I opened it up, and it had a report from Salt Lake, but it also had my original stake president's recommendation. And I read, my stake president wrote down Tony, which is what everybody called me growing up. Tony's a fine young man and something like this. But then he said, but he's not a leader. He's a follower. My stake president wrote that. And I remember I read that, and it number one, made me laugh. Number two, made me mad. And I remember thinking, who are you, to tell me if I'm a leader or a follower, And it was just one of those moments where here I had one leader who branded me as more of a follower and not fit for leadership, basically. And then I had another leader who, from the very beginning, said, "You're going to be a great leader." And it's interesting that, I don't know whether I am or I'm not a natural leader, but it's interesting how we we can, if we're not careful, we can buy into what people say about us and how they brand us. And there's this classic saying that's really governed my life in terms of how I treat other people. My PhD is in education, but my emphasis is actually educational leadership. There's a famous German philosopher, and he said, if you treat a man as he is, he will remain as he is. But if you treat him as what he ought to be and can become, he'll become what he should become. And I've always kind of tried to use that philosophy in my life to treat people better than maybe where they're at, to try to give them confidence, and instead of labeling them in a negative way, to help them see themselves in a positive way. I'm glad my mission president did that for me, because it helped me kind of say, like, oh, maybe I am a leader, as opposed to somebody saying, oh, you're not a leader. That was a defining moment, and the Snoopy part of looking in mission files on my part. When I was made a zone leader, I was sent out to this little dumpy town in Bolivia in the middle of the Altiplano in the desert called Oruro. And I'll keep my companion's name anonymous because this story is not favorable for him. But I was sent there, and they said, you're going to be the zone leader. And I got sent out there and showed up in the middle of the night, met my companion like at 2 a.m. is when I arrived, went to bed next morning. The office missionaries called me and kind of gave me my marching orders. And when I got there, they told me, this zone's kind of a mess. And the reason why is because your companion, who was already one of the zone leaders there, and his companion, who I had just replaced, have just been going around every day and hitting on local Bolivian girls, and both of them have had girlfriends. And when I heard that, I was just ticked. I was just mad. Not because they weren't doing what God had sent them to do, but I remember I hung up the phone and I turned to him and I said, Elder, they just told me this and this and this and this. And I said, I want you to know, I didn't travel thousands of miles to Bolivia to hit on girls, and to be lazy and sit around and live in a mud house and eat, in my American palate, terrible food, and be away from my family. I'm like, if I'm going to hit on girls, I'm going home, And I just basically said to him, "What are you doing here?" And I just lost it on him, and I just said, when you're with me, if you have any problems with girls, if you have any issues like that, I said, I don't even hesitate to say, I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And probably not the most Christ-like way to handle things. I don't think that's in the scriptures anywhere to, threaten bodily violence on people if they're not doing what's right. But and he just kind of went like, okay, yeah, I'll do better. It's like, good. And he ended up becoming a great companion. And we had a lot of great success together. But yeah, it's just like, what? I am not here to do that. Holy cow. I'll go home if that's the case. Bolivia is a country that has a lot of political unrest and government unrest. And when I was there were not a lot of white people in Bolivia. There were not a lot of Americans. My mission president was German. Technically, he was Austrian and had grown up in Bolivia, but he was still light-skinned, and I was light-skinned, and my companion happened to be American. And we were driving down the freeway one time. There's riots in Bolivia all the time, and especially in the main city of La Paz where I was serving. And we were driving down the road in our Land Cruiser, and all of a sudden I saw this riot police come flying by us on the freeway, and I was driving. And I looked ahead, and there was a riot up on the freeway. There's only one freeway in and out of the main city, and we were driving up to the airport to pick up some missionaries. And I see probably, I don't know, half a mile ahead that there's a riot, and there's protesters in the road, and they've turned over a bus and lit it on fire. And the riot police have all gone up there to try to disperse the riot and clear the freeway off. And so I'm kind of sitting back, and my mission president is really kind of impulsive, impatient kind of a guy. And he kind of just goes, "Oh, I was taking him so long. We're going to be late," in his Austrian, Bolivian accent, you know. And all of a sudden he gets out of the car and starts walking up the side of the freeway up to the front of the riot police and starts telling them where to go. "You guys push over there," and I just see him directing people. And I'm sitting back in the car, and I turn to my companion, I'm like, he's like acting like a military general. And all of a sudden he looks back at me and he goes like this. Like motions for me to drive the car up to where he's at. So I pull the car off the side of the freeway and drive up the shoulder up to the very front. So now there's the rioters, my mission president, me, the rioters, the riot police, my mission president, me, and he gets in the passenger seat and he says, they're gonna break it up right here, and right when they break it up, I just want you to shoot the gap. And so I said, all right, and but then instead the police were pushed back by the riot. The rioters kind of pushed on them, and the police couldn't contain them and pushed them back. So now the police all moved back, and now it's the rioters, me, riot police behind. And we get surrounded probably by, 100 or so rioters holding rocks and flaming torches and metaphorical pitchforks, but that's what it felt like. And all of a sudden I see one of them kind of look in the car, and they see 3 light-skinned people, and I hear one of them yell, "There's gringos in the car," which is what they called us, gringos. And you start to hear him and I hear one guy say, "Kill the gringos." And our car starts getting stoned. Boom, 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 starts getting pelted. And my mission president says, "Go, go, 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 go." And so I floored it forward and I broke through the first group that was around us without running anybody over. And also my mission president's like, "Stop, stop, 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 stop," because there was another group ahead. And he says, "Get out, let me drive. And suddenly I feel like I'm in a war zone, and I have to get out and run around while my mission president slides over. I appreciate that one, President. And I run around as people are chucking rocks at us and jump in the driver's seat, and I've just never forgot this. My mission president turns and looks at me and looks at my companion in the back seat, and he just goes, "May God bless us." And he just takes off and just heads right for this whole riot. And he would have just plowed through them. And luckily they jumped to the side. I remember this one guy was holding a baseball bat, and as we came by, he just smashed our car with it right as we drove by. And there's these people up on an overpass holding a boulder. They tried to drop it on our car as we went by. And anyway, we broke through, and when we got up to the airport, an hour late with a rock and baseball bat ridden car, these missionaries we picked up were just like, and some of them were from America, what took you guys so long? And then they come out of the car, "Whoa, your car's really beat up." We took them down a back little dirt road. "Why are we taking?" I was just like, "We're taking you the scenic route." I didn't even tell them what happened. Yeah, and that was Bolivia. That was being there. I had some really cool stories too, where it just felt like we were doing the Lord's work. That, and again, have really shaped me as a professional religious educator now. Where when I was on my mission at that time, we memorized our discussions word for word, which helped when you didn't know Spanish. But by the time I hit, a year and a half into my mission, I was tired of giving the same word for word discussion. And I was with a companion. We served in this tiny little jungle town. Half of Bolivia is basically in the Andes Mountains, and the other half's in the Amazon jungle, Amazon basin. And for the last months of my mission, I got sent to this little jungle town with another missionary who I had started my mission with. We had known each other our whole missions, and we're good friends. And we just kind of made the decision that we're just going to teach people in our own way. We'll teach the principles that they want us to teach, but we're going to say them in our own words. And it was kind of a forerunner to preach my gospel almost, that concept. We felt so prepared to teach, and I just remember feeling just, feeling really strongly that God had called me and authorized me and had given me power and authority and to teach. And I remember, just as I'm saying this, just one time he and I were sitting out in the Bolivian jungle teaching this, just probably 3 or 4 families that had gotten together under this, they call them pawichis, this little grass, hut kind of a thing. In the middle of the jungle as the sunset and twilight, and I just remember telling them the first vision story, and they were just enraptured by it, and just feeling like, this is right, this is good, this is true, this is what I should be doing, this is cool, Those are the moments on your mission where you're like, I'm sure glad that I am here and doing this, and didn't go home when I was an angry, electrocuted, naked guy on the first 2 weeks of my mission. My companion and I, in one of the cities, I had an American companion, and people would run up to us all the time and say, in English, they would want to talk to us in English, which is a lot of, when you go on a foreign mission, you get that, people loved English. People would wear like American shirts that had English writing on it just because it was American and English in Bolivia. So people would run up to us and, say like, Mister, or the girls or ladies. I remember this old Bolivian Cholita Indian lady, Mister, I love you. They'd say stuff like that and would laugh and in English say back, I love you. And so we had this great idea. We were asked to do at least 2 hours of service every week in our mission. And it's fairly common today, but back then it wasn't. I turned to my companion and I said, dude, we should just teach free English classes for people for our service. Instead of walking around asking if people need us to help them, clean up their yard or move or lay adobe bricks. Let's just teach free English classes. And he's like, that's a great idea. So we made these cheesy little signs that said, free English classes taught, and we wrote in Spanish, taught by dos gringos muy guapos, which means 2 really humble Americans. That means, 2 handsome Americans. We made, 50 photocopies of it and just stapled them up around on little telephone poles around the town. And we showed up the first night to teach it. And we expected, 10, 20, 30 people to be there. And we showed up and the bishop said, we've put you into the chapel because there's 400 people here. And we had 400 people show up. And the chapel was full, front row all the way to the back. And I turned to my companion like, all right. And I remember standing in front of him and in English I said, hello. And they in English, hello, and it was so fun. We started teaching them. We taught it, and we did it once a week. And after a few weeks, this guy raises his hand, this Bolivian Indian guy. None of them, by the way, I shouldn't say none, but very few of the 400-ish that would come every week were Latter-day Saints. They were of other faiths or no faith at all. And this one guy raises his hand one day and says, is that why you're here? Are you like on an American mission to teach English to people? And I said, oh, no, we're here as missionaries to teach the greatest message that's on the earth, that God's called prophets again and that, the fullness of his gospel has been restored and that there's new scripture and new revelation. And I totally primed him, I said, but that's not why we're here tonight. I said, this is a free English class. We're not here to proselytize to you. I said, we're just here to serve you. But I said, but when we're done, if anybody wants to stay and hear about our message, please feel free to stay. And we got done teaching the English class, and I said, all right, anybody who wants to leave can leave, and those who want to hear about our message, about why we're really here as missionaries can stay. And guess how many people left? None. They all stayed there. And that was a cool experience. I turned to my companion and I was just like, I'm taking this one, dude. I got this one. And I remember teaching 400 people about, Joseph Smith and his quest for truth and the first vision and the Book of Mormon. And And our mission, it was just a neat, you kind of felt like one of those missionaries in Scripture or in church history where you're teaching huge groups of people. And in our mission, the way we had to give our weekly report was if you taught one discussion or one lesson, but there were 2 families there, it counted as 2 discussions. So I still remember going through a weekly report and Elder Solis and Elder Matos, how many discussions did you give this week? And they're like, 32. And Elder, my companion was Mortensen. Elder Mortensen and Elder Sweat. And we were like, 278 or whatever it was, and they're like, no way. And we told them the whole story. But we ended up baptizing about a dozen people out of that English class. And that was a really cool experience. Yeah, I'd say that, I think the first thing is that I think sometimes when you hit midlife, like where I'm at, people look at you and say, oh, did you plan on doing this all along? And the answer is no. If you would have told me when I was a returned missionary, I just got married, or that I'd become a religion professor or write and teach, I never would have believed that. So. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, I listened to this podcast one time, and this person said, raise your hand if you're on your plan A in life. And like 2 people out of a crowd of 1,000 raised their hand. And most people are on plan B or plan C, or they're somewhere where they didn't even plan. And, I definitely became a religious educator, not because of something that I planned, or chose, but it more chose me. And so I think, a lot of people ask me, how did I become a religious educator, how did I become a professor? And I originally my bachelor's degree is in fine art, in painting and drawing. And I still paint and still pursue my art career, but it's secondary. But while I was going to school one time, I spoke in church, and afterward, this guy came up to me who I'd never met. It was in my ward. My wife and I moved into this basement apartment in an established family ward. And this guy walks up to me and says, what do you plan on doing for your career? And I told him I was going to be a painter. And he said, well, have you ever thought about teaching for the church educational system? And I remember I said to him, what's the church educational system? And he said, oh, like an institute teacher, seminary teacher. And I just laughed and blew him off and said, no way. That's not even on my radar. But it was one of those rare moments. He just said to me, he goes, well, if you ever want to talk about it, he says, I think you'd do really good. And so if you want to talk about it, let me know. And he gave me a little business card. And I remember I went home from church that day and tried to shake it and couldn't shake it. It's one of those interesting times in your life where, it's almost like God kept saying to me, you need to look into this. You need to look into this. Almost like, your plans are stupid. And, I don't care what you think you want to do. I have some plans for you. And I think for the most part, God kind of lets us choose our path in life. But every now and then, He lets us know very clearly when He has a path for us. And later that night, I turned to my wife and I said, I can't shake what that guy said about me looking into teaching the gospel for a living. And my wife just said, I can't shake it either. And so I went over to his house and knocked on his door that evening, my wife, and I took a little walk, and his wife answered the door. And the first thing she said is, he knew you'd come over. And then we sat down and talked, and that's what launched me on my path to looking into teaching seminary originally for the LDS Church, and then it's led me into becoming a BYU professor. So it's just one of those moments in my life that really changed my trajectory that day. Back to like the question of what would I want my kids to know, or what do sometimes people ask me, when they're searching for their careers. Speaking really candidly, one of my main worries was teaching for the church doesn't make a lot of money. And in a society that really values money and puts a lot of worth, I could throw out the synonym. If I said, think of a synonym, if I said, oh man, he's really become successful. Our society equates success with money. People would say, when I say someone's become really successful, they wouldn't think, oh man, he must have a lot of children. He must really be doing some good in the world. They would think, oh, he must be making bank, or he must be in a position of power or influence. And so the thought of teaching in a seminary classroom, which was where I started my career, being really candid, it was hard as a 23-year-old when you feel like the world's your oyster and everything's in front of you, to make a conscious decision to say, well, I'm going to live on teacher's salary. Now, I want to be fair to the church. They take care of their people just fine, but you're never going to become rich. And I happened to, when I was in college, I happened to have gotten in with a company that was just founding and just getting started. And I worked there during my bachelor's degree, and they had promoted me to some management positions really quickly, and they'd give me stock options in their company, and I was already making a decent salary. And my wife and I already had one child, and during my senior year, we had our second one on the way. And it was right at the time when the church, they offered me a full-time position to teach. And I was sitting at my job, where I was making a decent income already, talking with this guy about this decision. And he just said to me, he just goes, oh, Tony, you are a fool if you go teach. He said, why? Why would you relegate your life to, middle class or just limit the amount of money you can make? And, he in essence said, you're going to live your life as a poor church mouse kind of a thing. And to be honest, that was one of my worries. I was even worried what my children would think about that. And it was interesting. I still remember where I was standing in that moment with that guy sitting across a cubicle. And I had a distinct scripture pop into my mind from the New Testament where the Savior says, beware of covetousness, for a man's life consisteth not in the abundance of the things he possesseth. I still remember that phrase coming just crystal clear like that to my mind, right as we were talking. And it's just one of those defining moments in my life where I was like, is your life going to be about making money? And I'm not criticizing anybody who does that. I think that's a noble pursuit, and we need people who have wealth and influence. But for me, it was a moment where God kind of said, is your life going to be about making money and having value in the world's eyes, or is it going to be about doing what I want you to do and having value in God's eyes? And that was another just kind of real defining moment that helped me more clearly make a decision to say, I feel like the Lord wants me to do this, and that this is what I'm meant to do. I think when I went back to career, back to things that I never planned on, even when I became a teacher for the church, I finished my bachelor's degree, and the church does a really good job for their seminary and institute people of encouraging them to get graduate degrees, particularly a master's degree. So I got my master's degree, and I really enjoyed it. But I always felt this, I felt like this nagging prompting to get a doctorate degree as well. I had always naturally been good at school. I didn't consider myself a brainiac, but I know how school works, and I knew how to get good grades. And really, when you get into graduate school, it's all about reading and writing anyway. And I was always fortunate that I could read and write well. And so, I kept having these. I didn't want to get a doctorate degree. It's a lot of hard work, I just wanted to go to work and come home and hang out and be with my kids. But kind of another lesson I've learned in life is that that's not what the Lord plans for me, and it's not why I'm here on earth, is to relax and have a life of ease. The test of my life so far has been that the Lord constantly wants me to do things, and I feel really driven to, if I waste an hour in my day, I kind of feel like, I've been a slothful person, But so I kept having these promptings, and at the time President Hinckley was the prophet of the church, and he kept saying one of his mantras was, get all the education that you can, get all the education you can. And every time I'd hear that, I'd hear these little whispers like, get your PhD, get your PhD. And I would kind of argue back and be like, no, no, I don't want to. And I was talking to my wife about it because I knew it was going to take 4 or 5 years of hard work. We were married with, now by this time, 4 children. And we had we're building a house, and I was the Elders Quorum president, and it was just a busy time in life. And I kept getting these promptings, and finally my wife, she said to me, she goes, if God asked you to be the bishop, like if you were called to be the bishop, would you say yes? And I said, well, of course I would, and she said, even though it's a 5-year calling. She goes, and I said, yeah. And she goes, even though it's a lot of work. Yeah, even though it'll take all your extra time. Yeah, and right then she had me, I knew where she was going. And, she said, well, if God would formally call you to do something like that and you'd be willing to do it, then if he's calling you through the Holy Ghost or through his Spirit to put in 5 years of work, 4 or 5 years of hard work to get a PhD, why don't you say yes to that too, And again, that was just one of those deciding moments where I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I was fortunate to be able to do it, and had a school that accepted me, and it didn't take 5 years. It only took 4, and a few gray hairs. So, yeah. Back to lessons learned in choosing a career. During that time, ironically, while I was getting my PhD, I had met a friend. His name's John Hilton. I said that like a Utah. I should say John Hilton. He and I had taught together at an Especially for Youth, and he said to me, have you ever thought about writing any of this down that you've taught? And I said no, and he said, well, you should think about it. You should think about doing it. And he had published a book through Deseret Book, and when he asked me why not, I just kind of went like, well, I don't know. I don't know if that's for me and if I should. And he goes, well, all it does is extend your classroom to more people if you write it down and publish it in a book, and more people in more places can learn from you. And I said to him, well, who am I to write a book about anything or to be some authority on anything? And he kind of said, who is anybody, And if you don't write it, someone else will write it. People need books. People need to learn. And so he said, if you ever wrote a book, what book would you write? And I had actually kicked around this idea of writing a book called Why, or that centered on the why, on trying to teach. I taught seminary for a number of years and noticed that one of the things that seemed to be lacking was they knew all the things they should do, but they didn't know really why they should do them. And I started preparing like these little handouts that I'd give, this little 16-year-old when she got this steady boyfriend, or these little 14-year-old when they wanted to date somebody, and I'd be like, here's a few statistics, and here's a few quotes, and here's a few scriptures that would help you get why you shouldn't, or you should do this or that. So I said that to John, it'd be fun to do, if I wrote anything, it'd be this book called Why. And he's like, that's a great idea, why don't we write it up? And one thing I've learned from him is he's a real go-getter, And before I knew it, he had pitched the idea to one of his people at Deseret Book and said, "Hey, do you care if I have this friend, his name's Anthony Sweat, do you care if we co-author a book?" And this would be, and they gave him the green light to say, "Yeah, write it and send it to us." And he calls me up and said, "Oh, hey, I pitched that to Deseret Book and they're interested in it. Let's write it." And I kind of hung up the phone and turned to my wife and I said, "Well, I guess I'm going to write a book." And we wrote that book, and it became one of Deseret Book's bestsellers. And that kind of started opening the window for me to write books. And to this time now, I've either written or co-authored 10 books. And but again, if you had told me that 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been in my plans. It wasn't on my radar. But I think kind of what I've learned from that is you have to be open to the opportunities that get presented in front of you. You can't be so fixed on your plans that, no, this is my plans and this is what I'm doing. You have to have goals, and you have to have direction and things you're trying to achieve. But as you're going, you kind of have to keep your eyes open to the opportunities, to the doors that open along the way. And writing has definitely been one of those doors that I never really planned on, but it has become a major part of my life and a great source of satisfaction and frustration. But more than anything, a great source of satisfaction. So. Sometimes I'll have students say, or people come talk to me, and they'll want to know how did you become a professor writing books with a PhD? And I just say to them, I didn't plan any of that. Like that, I didn't have some master plan. I just tried as I went, bit by bit, to listen to what I felt like were promptings or direction from God, and to be open to opportunities that presented themselves, and then also not to be afraid to do things, not to let fear govern me in my decisions.